Gunflint Trail Fire Chief. And I want to thank all of you for coming and for your interest in the ARMER Tower at Hall 3, which we think will provide us good communication at the end of the trail and is the least intrusive spot we could use. I'd like to thank also, there are a lot of people who worked on this project, which Valerie will introduce, and a lot of you out here who have also worked on it. So I'm going to turn this over to Valerie, and she will moderate from here.
Awesome. Thank you, Chief. Got a couple of folks coming in. Thanks for coming. We're just about to get rolling. So I want to just give a quick overview of the agenda and do some introductions of who's here. We have many different subject matter experts. I'm Valerie Morosco. I'm the county's Director of Emergency Management and Public Information. And we really understand that there is a lot of questions about how we got here, what's being proposed, what other options have been looked at, and why is the proposed solution being proposed. So we wanted to give everybody an opportunity to come together because this is a unique project that has multiple partners. It's not just a county project. It's not just a Forest Service project. It's not just a fire department project. There's many different partners involved. So this is a great opportunity to get everybody in the same room, review what information we have, and give you the opportunity to ask questions and get some answers, excuse me, before the public comment period opens. So to review all of that information I just talked about, we have a panel of folks. To my right is Rowan Watkins. He's Cook County's radio communications analyst. To my left, you just met the chief. Rena Rogers, our Director of Management Information Systems with the county, and Sheriff Pat Eliason. In the audience, District Ranger, Gunflint District Ranger Michael Croteau from the U.S. Forest Service, and Shane Chatlin from MnDOT Radio Communications Operations Manager. So thank you for coming up all the way up here to be a part of this and help deliver that information. So it's an opportunity to do due diligence, obviously, around looking at all of the options and have a joint discussion about the recommendation. So really, how did we get here? I'm going to let Rowan tell you a little bit about the history and review the steps and the options.
Thanks, Valerie.
There you go.
Thanks. So in talking about how we got here and the timeline and the different options that were proposed over the last several years, going back all the way to 2012, I thought it would be helpful to just take the time to provide a little bit of context and information on how, when, and why the county and the public safety community of the county decided to transition to the ARMER system. And that's a question that's also been raised in other public meetings, and I thought it would be a good and appropriate time to talk about that. So the documentation that we have that I think kind of describes that in the most concise way is the narrative for the FEMA fire grant application that ultimately was awarded and funded the majority of that transition. And in that narrative, the key takeaways in terms of why were for improved coverage, cost of maintaining and improving infrastructure, as well as interoperability. And I'll talk a little bit about more of each of those in terms of the ARMER system, but also I pulled some quotes from the narrative that gives some context into how the old VHF, the former VHF system was viewed at the time and the reason why they wanted to move to something else. So again, in the narrative for the grant application, the regional project, it's described as a regional project to replace obsolete VHF radio equipment used by the 12 volunteer fire and EMS agencies throughout the county. And it's also described as a system that was characterized by congestion and grossly inadequate coverage, as well as being not interoperable with most mutual aid agencies in the neighboring counties and most state and federal agencies. So when you talk about the ARMER system in terms of improved coverage, I think there's two important things to talk about. First, there is a difference between what your real coverage is and perceived coverage, and why that's important when you consider the ARMER system is that an ARMER radio is a lot more like a computer or a cell phone than a traditional radio. When you move into an area where you don't have signal, the radio tones and alerts and identifies and lets you know that you, in fact, don't have coverage in this area. That's not true of traditional VHF radios. The only way that you actually know if you don't have coverage in that area is if you attempt to use it. And so the ARMER system's ability to identify area of coverage just by being on the hips of our first responders really improved our understanding of where we do and don't have coverage. The second part about coverage, and specifically in relation to the ARMER system as a whole and in terms of the decision for the grant, was that it's on a countywide basis. So there is vastly better coverage for the ARMER system in comparison to the old VHF system, and our public safety community will tell you that. But that's not to say that there aren't key areas that either had better coverage at one time or that never were and just need to be better covered by the ARMER system. And in fact, that's in large part why we're here tonight, is to talk about a solution to provide coverage for a key area that, that needs better coverage. So on the cost of maintaining and improving infrastructure, I think it's a pretty common theme for us as a county, as a local government. We're geographically large, population small, and tax base small. And that has sort of financial implications for projects that require you to provide a service on a county-wide level. And that's communication infrastructure definitely falls into that. And building our own system was something that's spelled out and considered in that grant narrative. It's talked about building a P25 VHF system. And ultimately, the real reason why that was decided to go in a different way is because the financial implications of taking on the ownership of having to maintain and improve that system over time, even if you were to fund the initial build out with a grant, are huge, and it has serious implications for a county like ours. And that is different from the ARMER system because the ARMER system is funded through statewide collection of 911 fees. And additionally to that point, the ARMER system was going to be built out in Cook County regardless of whether we decided to opt in or not. The state was going to build it out because they needed to use it for their DOT folks, state patrol, conservation officers. And so it was going to be built out whether we decided to opt in or not. Opting in obviously gave us a good system that we could use and ongoing infrastructure that we would have access to that we weren't solely responsible for maintaining. The last piece about interoperability, there's really no comparison. Being on the same platform and the same system and having banks of common channels with all of our state or mutual aid partners at the state and local level really provides a lot of serious benefits to our public safety personnel. And even at the federal level, entities like Border Patrol and others are largely using the ARMER system. But for a big one, and it's in parentheses here, interoperability, including agencies that continue to use VHF systems, like the Forest Service for us, they are increasingly buying radios that are capable of operating on the ARMER system, and there's a significant amount of infrastructure that the state has spent on the ARMER system to be able to interop with those agencies that are still on VHF systems. And the big one for us, obviously, is the Forest Service. So that's hopefully provides a little bit of context about the why. The when was 2012, and the how was the awardance of that grant that helped funded it. So in this slide, hopefully we're trying to take away a couple things here to show the existing infrastructure. It shows that the majority of the tower heights, it's a little small, I don't know if you can see it, but all of them except two are below 200 feet, and I think that's a sort of a testament to MnDOT's willingness to work with us, work with the county, and ensure that we don't breach that threshold that the FAA dictates for lighting towers. And that's something that's important to us. It retains the darkness that's important for our night sky and other things, and significantly reduces visual impact of tower sites. The only two exceptions on this map are Bogus and Honeymoon, and those towers were built and lit long before MnDOT came out and started building the ARMER system. The next thing that I want to talk about in this map is to show that you can see Gunflint Lake tower site is the last tower that kind of provides coverage up to the end of the trail, and so there's really a pretty important area, and we'll get into that a little bit more later, that just isn't covered. And the last thing on this slide is to help illustrate that the way that the ARMER system works is it's dependent on an interconnection between towers, and it needs to have some sort of high-speed data backhaul. So when you look at this map, you can see that the Gunflint Lake tower site has line of sight and a link back to the Mid-Trail tower site, and then from there down to Bogus Lake and Maple Hill to Lutsen, all the way down the shore to Duluth and throughout the state. That's what gives the ARMER system its redundancy and resiliency, and what allows it to have the 24/7, 365 monitoring that really gives it a lot of benefits as a system. And that's going to be important in the next couple slides when we talk about the initial options that we started considering, is that traditionally that high-speed data backhaul that links the towers is done by microwave, which requires line of sight. So when we first got into the ARMER system and we started using it, the first local agency was the sheriff's office, and then there was a handful of others that had access to ARMER radios and started doing some road testing. And pretty early on, we could tell that there was going to be coverage issues in the end of the trail area. And so right away, we started looking at where can we look at properties that we think would improve coverage in this area because it's important, and would have the potential of meeting that line of sight requirement back to the Gunflint Lake tower site to provide that required microwave link. And so these are a couple of the properties that we initially looked at, and you can see there's a date, a timestamp down there on the bottom right corner, 2013. And what we found out pretty quickly, this is a line of sight analysis, again, that the county ran. And what you see in the green and red below is the topography. And the two dots on either end of the chart are the tower with their respective elevations. And even with a 180 or 190 foot tower, we had an obstruction. And so really what that meant is that of the locations that we started to look at, we were having a hard time identifying places where we could build a tower that would provide coverage in that area that wouldn't breach that FAA threshold. And so we started to move on. We didn't want to support that, building a tower that was going to have lights that close to the BWCA, and we wanted to find a better solution. But we spent quite a while looking for, trying to identify properties that would meet that criteria. So based on that, in 2013 or 14 or so, we reached out to MnDOT and we said, we're having trouble identifying property where we can get that line of sight that'll cover the area that we're trying to cover, but won't breach that threshold that the FAA has for lighting. And based on that criteria, MnDOT came up with the old helipad link for us, old helipad site. And it for a lot of reasons, and for quite some time, it was the best option. It was a 180-foot tower that at that location would have provided the required link back to the Gunflint Lake site, but would have also, because of its increase in elevation and a tower of that height, would have provided coverage for the area. And another factor was the proximity to access as well as utility power. So around the same time, the Gunflint Trail Volunteer Fire Department started doing some testing with ARMER radios, early 2015. And so in this map here, what you're seeing, the red dots are areas where there is very poor or no portable coverage, and the yellow dots represent the areas that were in need of improved portable coverage. And in allowing me to show this map, the fire department asked that I say that since then, there are several additional areas that they've identified inside this area that, that don't have coverage, where the portable radios just don't work at all. But I wanted to show the slide anyways because I think it helps visually show the exact area of concern and where we're looking to provide coverage and where the public safety community is telling us that they need it and why it's so important. And they'll get into that a little bit more in just a minute. But I think right now I'm going to turn it over to Rena to summarize some of that and give additional factors, and then at some point we'll talk about the proposed solution.
Thanks, Rowan. I kind of have the minimal slides. Can you tell that? So each one of the solutions that Rowan talked about from the past that we were initially looking at all involve different partners and different constraints. And it's for this reason, really, after 5 years, we're still talking about this. We were looking at height and trying to not have towers that were tall and particularly lit when they're close to the boundary waters. We had to look at things like, was there electricity and backhaul close by, and would it really actually cover that area? So the solution that's proposed that Rowan will discuss in more detail in a few minutes involves several partners. And I might also add that the partnerships change depending on the site. So depending on who owns the land, they can change pretty dramatically. First of all, the partnerships include the Gunflint Trail Fire Department, who in the 4 years I've been here, going to 911 communication meetings, have been a pretty steady voice saying, we have a problem that needs to be solved. Every time there'd be an incident where they had to go out and they didn't have radio communication, they would come back to the next meeting and say, what's the progress on this? They also own or have the lease with the Forest Service for the Hall 3, and so they're a pretty significant partner in this right now. MnDOT, who is a very significant partner, builds out and maintains all of the ARMER sites. And they build standard ARMER sites, so when we ask them to do something that's outside of the standard, that makes it more complicated and sometimes involves financial decisions that are outside of their standard that someone else has to take care of. So that's an important point in consideration. As Rowan mentioned, we're a small county, and so we benefit greatly from the state taking care of these things. And if we had to do these towers on our own, it would be very difficult for a small county to levy for that. There's also Arrowhead is involved in True North. They provide a lot of backhaul for us and fiber and electricity to the sites. And then Cook County, because we're the main customer kind of ARMER in this county, our public safety people. Rowan supports that for all of our partners that use it. Everybody from school bus drivers to volunteer fire departments to Arrowhead Electric to people that clear ski trails sometimes. So there's a lot of different people that use this system. So whenever a site has been proposed, there are a lot of steps to see if it's feasible. And they don't always pass, as we go through this process, they don't always pass every single step. For instance, a propagation study, does it actually, in this location, cover what it needs to cover? How does it affect the viewshed? Is it, as the one tower that they looked at for a long time, the 180-foot tower that Rowan mentioned a second ago, it was pointed out 3 years ago in a public meeting that if that tower were built, it would be the most prominent feature on the horizon for miles and miles around because of the burn area. Personally that resonated with me, and I thought about it a lot, and I thought, well, what's a way that we can minimize that? And so we're pretty dedicated to that. The county, by policy and by ordinance, has actually asked MnDOT many times, can we lower that tower? Can we do something shorter? Can we find a more minimal solution? And so we've added that extra constraint to these other constraints of financial and location, who owns the land, all of these other things. We've also added that constraint of what's the minimum impact. And I think it's an important one. It's one that I think everybody up here believes in. So over those past 5 years, none of those solutions met that criteria very well. And then broadband came along and gave us some new ways of looking at it. Can we lower that tower? Can we make it so that it's not dependent on that line of sight? Can we lower it? How low can it go? And you know, I think the solution that we have of getting from a 180-foot tower to an 80-foot tower is a pretty minimal impact solution. This latest proposal has a lot of partners and it has a lot of moving parts. And for a long time, we didn't know whether this tower was going to be feasible at all. There were a lot of questions that had to be answered. Could we amend a lease with the volunteer fire department with the U.S. Forest Service? Would it actually cover the area in a propagation study? What was the visual impact? There were just a lot of questions. And what is the financial impact? Because, by the way, this is a non-standard solution, so it's not one that MnDOT usually does. So what are the financial implications and who's going to pick up those costs? As of the end of last week, I was just getting answers to the last of those questions. So it's not something that we've known about that would work for sure for a long time. And so we wanted to be sure that the idea was feasible, and before we promised something we couldn't deliver. Now, having said that, I know we've been getting some feedback that perhaps we haven't been communicating enough about this for a long time and bringing people into it. And personally, I guess I'd like to apologize to individuals that feel like that we haven't communicated enough. I feel like we have, but if we haven't and people feel that way, then we probably need to make some changes, and we are. So it's never my intent to hide information, and it never has been, and it isn't now. We've already started looking at how do we take the regular communication we're doing with the 911 committee and extending that further to appear with the commissioners after those meetings and share all the projects that we're doing. So we're bringing that into the public forum. It's always been in the public forum, so we, our partners would take it back to their people, but we'll do it. We'll be on that commissioner board meeting now. Anyway, so we are always considering these key factors. First and foremost, public safety. If there wasn't a public safety issue, we would not be here tonight. If there wasn't a gap in that communication, there's no way we'd be talking about this tower. Second of all, we always want to try and find the best solution with the most minimal impact. What's the best service we can get with the most minimal impact? And then last, what's the financial consideration that the county might have to absorb depending on what that solution is? So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Valerie and let her talk about public safety.
Thanks, Rena and Rowan. As I mentioned, public safety is the biggest concern, and as from emergency management, that is my primary concern as a representative of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, the county's emergency management department. One of the things that we're most concerned with is a community's ability to respond to disasters, provide for its emergency services providers, protect them, also our citizens and our visitors. So if we look at that, and Rena already kind of touched on some of this, who's using the ARMER system? Well, we know it's law enforcement, and that's a number of different agencies of law enforcement. It's not just our sheriff's office, but the State Patrol, our Border Patrol, 1854, the DNR, the Forest Service has some interoperability with some ARMER radio. The dispatch office also has equipment to work with their radio system. as well as our Canadian mutual aid partners. And this is going to become bigger and bigger. We have a number of mutual aid partners in existence for fire, but as the NEMAC, which is the Northern Emergency Management Assistance Compact, inches closer, we're able to talk to some of our partners who may be closer in response and have higher capacities than it would take to deploy out of our jurisdictionally regulated markets like the city. So Ontario is getting much closer to signing that mutual aid agreement. We just met about it last month, had great representation, and we are already working with them and have tested that patch back and forth into the OPP's system. So that's fantastic. Obviously, our fire departments, EMS, search and rescue. The hospital is also on our ARMER system, which is a huge consideration when we look at public health emergencies. Emergency management is as well. The highway department and MnDOT, our school system and our school buses. The assessor's office and land services department are on ARMER when they're out in the field, as well as public health and human services when they're doing field visits. They have our ARMER radios. Our community emergency response teams, our Gunflint Emergency Services chaplain, it's also on that system with the radio. Special events and volunteers, we have a cache of radios that are issued to them who take advantage of that service. And then the media have access to it if they're named in our plan as a source of public information. They're scanning for information all the time, but they can also be assigned an ARMER radio in the event that critical information needs to get out to the public. One of the other major things of concern is the highest risk areas and historic instances of disasters and things like our Community Wildfire Protection Plan, as well as the All Hazard Mitigation Plan approved by FEMA and has gone through a number of processes, identifies, you can see the red area up here. This is the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, and these are the fire ignitions maps since 1986. So the highest instances of wildfire happening are in the area where we don't have the coverage that's required. When you look back historically at all the major incidents, the Ham Lake fire, obviously, 140 structures lost, over 75,000 acres, and over $11 million it cost to put that out. The Cavity Lake fire is well over 11 million, 32,000 acres. The Alpine Lake fire in 2005, the blowdown was significant, 500,000 areas. And we know with our weather patterning, there's a higher chance for blowdown instances to be happening, have greater impacts, which are more costly, affecting more lives, affecting more structures. We look at the Sag Corridor fire in 95, back to the Roy Lake fire in the 70s and the Prayer Lake fire. So this area, the red area, is rated as the highest risk area in all of our plans, and that's predominantly because of the fuels that are in this area, large accumulations of them, and then the infrastructure values that are at risk and the challenging access. Inadequate, with the last iteration of the CWPP, which was just approved last July, went through an update process. They have to be updated every 5 years for a community to be eligible for coverage and funding from FEMA and for mitigation projects. So we've updated ours, and included in this last iteration was all of the fire department's top concerns. So radio communications in the Sag and Seagull Lake area and poor road access were identified as the top concerns for the highest risk areas and the highest hazard areas. So when we look at the population factors and area usage, obviously we have a responsibility to our responders and our citizens that live here, but we're also seeing that there's increased numbers in users throughout the area from visitors. So if we look at the infrastructure, our residential properties, there's 2,412 parcels, and this includes 1,841 homes and cabins. We've got 571 resorts or commercial properties. Campgrounds, there's the 10 designated, but there's also all of the permitted sites within the boundary, or the Superior National Forest, the permitted sites. And if we look at the numbers just from last year, from May 30th through, or May through September of 2017, we know for a fact that there was 16,623 registered users, so that were either permitted for camping or paddling. So this is a significant piece of the population that is coming here, and there's an expectation that, you know, when something bad happens, public safety resources are going to be available. That does not include all of the other day tripping folks, all of the other visitors throughout the county. So when we look at that and we look at the lodging taxes showing continued growth over the last year, when you look going back to just from 2010 to 2017, it went from 815 million, or almost 816 million, up to, or sorry, 815,000 up to almost 2 million. So we've got an increase just in the last year, steady increase. And if we look at the change since the base year of 04 and 05, it's almost a 58% increase in the visitorship and the usage. So this is in addition to the responsibility we have for our public safety responders and our citizens that are here year-round. But what hasn't gone up 58% in the last 14-ish years is the number of responders. So we're having to spread that out and deal with that increase in population, but our responder resources have not increased. So we need that communication to be there so that you can effectively respond to, deal with, and protect those people as well, because we're limited to start with. So want to talk a little bit about the emergency services providers' experiences starting, you know, what has the people who are responding to in this area, the Gunflint Trail, Fire Department, EMS, Search and Rescue, what are they experiencing? What has their experience been since the initial documentation was done? I don't know if Jim or Michael, sorry, I didn't introduce Michael before. Michael Valentini is a key member of the Gunflint Trail Fire Department.
I can speak a little bit about that. Thank you, Val. We, as a fire department, have been on a number of runs, and I can say that every single time we respond to either a search and rescue, a medical emergency, a fire, whatever it is, those of us that live at the end of the trail cannot communicate no matter where we're going in the county because we have no coverage here. So this list just lists a few of the significant incidences that we've had to deal with as either search and rescue or as the fire department where communication was limited or non-existent. But every single call that we go on, those people that respond from up here are limited in letting other providers of their fire department members, they don't even know that we're coming until we can get primarily to the Seagull guard station. Once we get to the Seagull guard station, that's where we're connected quite regularly with the Gunflint Tower, and that's where communication goes back and forth. The last run that we had up here, and this is how this works. There was a call for a young girl who was in anaphylactic shock, and we were given the address. It wasn't given the name Wilderness Canoe Base, but those of up here who knew the address knew it was Wilderness Canoe Base. And the call came in by telephone to dispatch. So now we have this girl with anaphylactic shock. The people, the responders there, don't know who's coming because they can't communicate with radio, and we can't tell them where we're coming. What actually happened was they decided to leave Wilderness Canoe Base with the patient to head down the trail to be closer to the ambulance. I was coming basically from my house, which is only a couple miles away, and they had gone by me by the time I got to the end of the trail. I'm going up the trail to help. They're driving this way. It's not uncommon for us to be going in different directions simply because we can't communicate with one another. And that really is a hindrance, A, for the providers, and B, for the patient. And so this lists just a few of the incidents that we've been hampered by, but I can tell you every incident we've ever been on up here, in one way or another, we've been hampered because we have that inability to communicate. And they talk about the old VHF system. the old VHF system had some better coverage in some areas up here. And so we had a little bit better coverage up here, but overall this ARMER system is so much better throughout the county and the state that none of us in the department would ever go back to VHF, excuse me, as our main source of communication. ARMER is where we need to be, and we just need to enhance our ability to communicate on ARMER up here in this area. That's all I have.
So that's a fire department perspective, but also law enforcement as one of the key users. So Sheriff Pat, if you want to talk about your experiences. And what we did was, I mean, we couldn't go back through every single call that has come through dispatch and look at the reports over the last however many years, but we did poll the people that have been out there and asked, you know, when have challenges occurred on incidents?
So I'm going to sit back down if you guys don't mind. I'm going to start by echoing everything everybody else has been saying here, that radio communications are crucial in any public safety response. Excuse me. My office, obviously, we are probably the largest users of ARMER radio, and the communications for the Sheriff's Office, which includes search and rescue, is crucial for anything that we do, no matter where it is in the county. And we are tasked with public safety, which means keeping everybody in the county safe. And that doesn't mean the residents, that means all the visitors as well, and it also means my staff. So when an incident happens and we get to a spot where there's either no or it's bad radio communications, the people who live there deserve to have the best response we can give them. And the staff that responds deserves to have the best equipment they can have to respond. So everybody who's involved with that incident, in my opinion, gets to go home that night. And if for some reason we're not providing them with the best possible equipment, whether it's a sheriff's office, search and rescue, fire department, ambulance, you know, that's on us. We need to make sure that our responders are safe. We need to make sure the public is safe. And to do that, we rely heavily on radio, which, you know, here now is ARMER radio. And as Valerie said, these are, I polled my staff and asked them if they ever had any situations where they had limited or no ARMER coverage up at the end of the trail, and then I had told them to specify exactly where. And as you can see here, there are spotty places at the end of the trail. There are spotty places all over the county, don't get me wrong, but as I'm saying, the residents who live at the end of the trail deserve the best possible product that we can deliver to them.
So with all of the public safety experiences in mind, you know, we do have this responsibility, and we want to find a solution that's going to address that, obviously with the most minimal impact to both the environment, but also to taxpayers. So as Rena mentioned, financial considerations play a big role in that. So the interesting thing is that at the fire hall right now, there is a 74-foot expandable tower. So Rowan is going to talk about the differences in what that tower is, and then get into what is being proposed that will address all of the issues with the least intrusive solution.
Thanks. So a common question that we've got is, why do you need to replace a 74-foot tower with an 80-foot tower? A couple feet doesn't seem to make a big difference in it. It is just structurally. That tower is not structurally capable of holding the ARMER equipment. And that is and has been a factor that we've taken into consideration when identifying the area that we want to use. It already has public safety infrastructure, the fire hall and the tower. So this slide shows individual photos that are taken that include, and we'll get into this later, but are in the line of sight or in the view shed of this existing 74-foot tower. And they're geo-referenced so you can see where the tower, where the photo is taken in relation to the tower. And this is blown up on a larger format printout back there so that you can take a closer look. But really what it's showing is sort of in advance of the viewshed analysis that we're going to share, is that while you can see it from specific locations, by no means is it the dominant feature on the landscape. And that's really an important thing to all of us, is to make sure that it is providing the necessary coverage that we need in this area, but also that it's not going to seriously negatively impact the area and the viewshed. So, kind of backing up, as Rena mentioned, around 2015, when we were first having that discussion about the potential of having an ARMER site at the Helipad location. And for those of you who don't know, the Helipad location is down Larch Creek, and it's in real close proximity to the ranger station. And while that is outside of the area of concern for coverage, because of the elevation of the helipad and also the fact that for a microwave link to be possible, a 180-foot tower was going to need to be built. We were pretty confident that it would provide that coverage. But subsequently, and actually in a meeting that we had where that proposal was referenced, we did, as Rena mentioned, got some concern about what the visual impact would be of a tower, even though it wouldn't be lit, a tower of that height in that area. And we started to look at other options that really were just starting to be technically and financially feasible. And really what that is the broadband build out. So around the same time, broadband in the county was being built out by Arrowhead Electric and True North. And what is required for these is a high-speed data link. And if you can't or don't use microwave, another option is a fiber optic cable, but it has to be a dedicated fiber optic cable. And so really that significantly changed the way we were looking at this project. We no longer had to look at it from the point of view, where can we build a tower that A, will have the microwave link, the line of sight back to the Gunflint site, but also B, be in close enough proximity to provide the coverage for the area. When you can look at it with when you can eliminate that microwave link, then you can just look at it from a standpoint of how tall does the tower need to be from a coverage point of view only. And really what that allowed us to do then is to just pick a central location inside of the area where there is no coverage that these guys have described, and talk about how tall does a tower need to be then to fill that specific area. And so with that in mind, post 2015, as the broadband infrastructure became built out, we really started to look at seriously considering that as an alternative, frankly, because of how it would reduce the visual impact for the area. So with new options also come new requirements, and we spent a significant amount of time trying to understand the technical and financial requirements that would be associated with this type of solution. And we also had, as Rena mentioned, had to kind of pay close attention to the stakeholder relationships with each aspect. And so sort of at a high level, some of the initial questions that we started kind of asking around was, where would a tower of minimal height provide adequate coverage? So we started, again, verifying with the fire department where the issues were, and then with the sheriff's office, and then using our internal GIS staff and others to kind of start getting a handful of potential candidates. But also you needed to look at what would it cost to install and maintain dedicated fiber optic line from the Gunflint site to this new proposed location. And so we had conversations with MnDOT about what an agreement might look like, as well as with Arrowhead Electric and True North to talk about what type of infrastructure they had in the ground already and what might or might not be available to us. And then again, back with MnDOT to talk about, what are their requirements for a site like that. And then also, from a financial and operational standpoint with the fire department and the MIS department, if we're doing this and adding expense solely to reduce the visual impact, it's probably appropriate for us to anticipate absorbing some of those costs and taking some of that on. And we started having those conversations internally. And then finally also, what legal and permitting requirements are associated with any specific location. Now for this location, it'll be the Forest Service ultimately permitting it, but you need to have some sort of agreement with the leasee and the ultimate sub-leasee, which would be the fire department and MnDOT respectively. So they need to sort of come to terms that are agreeable to both. So there's a lot of conversations that have to be had and agreements that need to be kind of ironed out before something like this is possible. If any one of these weren't going to be met, then it really kind of would stop us from going forward, and we wouldn't really have any reason to pursue getting more information about any specific location. So, based on those really early considerations and early conversations, we felt confident enough in the Hall 3 site to start looking at it more closely. So the first thing we needed to do was to find out at what height would it be possible to build a tower site that would provide adequate coverage. So we worked with MnDOT. They generated a propagation study for an 80-foot tower at this location. And then we shared that with the sheriff's office and the fire department and said, take a look at this map. Tell us if it meets your needs. And to be honest, there was a little bit of a hemming and hawing and saying, yeah, but it would be nice if it was taller. But it does meet the primary areas of concern. And for us in the radio communication department standpoint, part of our stated goal and mission is to provide services, maximize services while minimizing impact. So that's sort of the right answer that we wanted to hear. Yes, it will meet what we need it to do, but it's as short as you can make it, so don't make it any less. So from there, once we knew that, from a technical and end user operational standpoint, it would meet their needs, we could start looking at the impact a little closer. And MnDOT ran a viewshed analysis for us. So this is a close-up slide, and then what you'll see after is a zoomed out view of the same analysis. And off to the left, the text there, I'm not going to read it all, but really what it's getting after, what it's from is the narrative that MnDOT created with this to provide context to explain what you're looking at. And sort of kind of generically what it says is that if you have 20/20 vision and you know exactly where to look and you're staring at it, is it possible to see any part of this tower? And if the answer to that is yes, then it needs to be displayed in bright yellow on this map. And so, when I saw this map, it kind of made me step back and wonder, how is it possible to really see that tower from that far? But I think it's important to have that context that this narrative provides. And so really what it says is that, the way there's a formula that MnDOT uses, and if you have 20/20 vision beyond 7 miles, your ability to discern an object comparable to the towers that MnDOT builds is diminished, and so you can't make it out without visual aids. So you either have to have beyond 7 miles without visual aids like telephoto lens or binoculars. You can't make out this tower. And they also go into some detail about the observer needing to have some time to make it out, and again to know exactly where to look. So this is the zoomed out version, and some of the highlights from the second part of the narrative are that of the over 33 million line of sight profiles calculated, less than 1% of the profiles present an unobstructed view of the tower. And so really what we're trying to get after here and provide context to is that, you know, while you can see this tower from several locations, by no means is it going to be the dominant feature on the landscape. It really is a minimal solution to an issue that our public safety community has been asking us for a really long time to solve. And some of the highlighted steps that have been taken to reduce the visual impact are stated in here. Obviously also the shortening of the tower's height, but also the fact that it's not visible. So if you can see that it's not, that it doesn't have lighting, and that reduces the visibility. So if you can see the top 6 inches of a tower that has LED lights blinking on the top of it, obviously, you know, that would make it sort of a dominant feature on the landscape, and you wouldn't have a hard time making that out. But without that, and this tower won't have that, from several areas, the majority of these areas that are highlighted in yellow, it would take some work to identify it. And the previous slide that I showed with the geo-referenced photos and the printout that's in the back, I think helps provide additional context to that, and hopefully some assurance that an 80-foot tower in this location really is a minimal solution and would have a minimal impact on the viewshed. So beyond that, there are other operational and financial considerations that we had to take into account. We had to have conversations about who has the expertise and capabilities to take on certain aspects of the project. Things like dark fiber versus microwave installation and construction of towers, as well as the ARMER site maintenance and installation. And who is it feasible and appropriate for to fund specific aspects of the project. So I sort of touched on it earlier before, but you know, MnDOT came up with a solution for us that would meet our coverage needs and could be done with their standard, the microwave link at the helipad site, the old helipad site. And we, because of some initial feedback that we got from the public, we pushed on that and said, no, with fiber coming in, is there other options? Can we do this in a different way and eliminate that level of visual impact, get that tower height significantly lowered? And the answer was yes, but that's going to add some expense. And we felt that it was appropriate then for us to look at taking on those expenses. And so in sort of raw numbers, what that is accounted for, and Rena alluded to it earlier, is that we just got these numbers the end of last week, that the installation piece, which the fire department has agreed to potentially pay for, would be around $5,000 for the installation of the fiber on both ends. And then the ongoing operational cost, the cost of leasing this dark fiber from True North, would be about a $750 a month bill that the MIS department would look to take on. And again, that cost is solely pointed at reducing the visual impact for this solution. Now, I think it's important to call out the deal that Arrowhead would be giving the county for this. It's still a fair amount of money and an ongoing cost, but if you were a private entity looking to lease that amount of fiber, you would be paying well over double that price. But because of the nature of the project and that it's public safety and it benefits them as well as the community as a whole, they're willing to give the county that deal. So those are the costs associated with it that the fire department and the county would be taking on if we move forward with this. So that sort of in summary is our proposal and the reasons why we're supporting it. We believe it is the most minimal solution, both from a visual impact and a financial standpoint, that provides the best solution for our public safety people. There was an additional consideration that we went into, and so in sort of kind of full disclosure, we wanted to share that information with you. And what that option consisted of was replacing the 100-foot tower at the ranger station as opposed to an 80-foot tower at the Hall 3 location. And so what this map illustrates here is, in blue you have the unique coverage that you would only get from the 80-foot tower at Hall 3, and in the lower right-hand corner you can see the brighter green coverage, and that's the coverage areas that you would get, a unique coverage you would get from the 100-foot tower at the ranger station. And then the kind of gray or dark green in the middle is the overlapping coverage that you would get from either site. And I think one thing that's important to mention here is that the existing coverage from the Gunflint site is not depicted. And because of the proximity to the Gunflint site and some limited road testing that we've done, the majority of that light green is very likely to already be covered, and is already covered from the Gunflint site. So, and I just mentioned that last part because I think it's important to note that there's not a lot of value added in that green area, and B, for the fire department or other people that might have concerns about certain areas not being covered, the Gunflint Lake site covers the majority of that area already. But, you know, and kind of the consensus of the stakeholder groups before this study was run was that it's a better option to use a shorter tower in the center of the dead area and to provide coverage than to use a taller tower further away outside of the coverage area and try to push coverage in. But that said, that study was requested by a private citizen, and MnDOT was willing and kind of gracious enough to run that and let us know. And we wanted to approach it with an open mind and said, I mean, if that can meet the coverage and people would be more satisfied with that, let's take a look. Please show it to us, and let's take a look. So MnDOT ran it, and we looked at it, and we used the data from that study to kind of zoom in and drill down and look at some of the areas that wouldn't be covered by that. And it includes the campground, the Sag Lake corridor, and several residential and developed areas in this area that ultimately led the sheriff's office and the fire department to not support that decision. But again, it was an option that was an additional option that was considered. We spent, you know, MnDOT and ourselves spent some time looking into it and exploring it, but ultimately it was decided to support the shorter tower at the Hall 3 location. So that's it.
Thank you. That's a ton of information. Important to note, though, that there are many steps in the process that aren't just county related. So to talk about, you know, what would the next steps be, the Forest Service plays a key role. There is a permitting process as well. Michael's going to probably put a little bit more detail behind that. But if the project were to move forward after it's gone through the processes, county commissioners would need to approve the operational expenditure that Rena and Rowan just described with maintaining the fiber. And then obviously a construction schedule would need to be set if this were to go forward. But the biggest piece of the puzzle is the permit. So, and there is a public process that goes along with that. So Michael, if you'd like to speak to that process for us.
Well, good evening. I know I haven't met some of you, and look forward to doing that perhaps here after the meeting. Again, I am the district ranger with the Gunflint Ranger District. They're down the road in Grand Marais, and I've been here about 6 months, and it's been a pleasure meeting a lot of folks in the community, and very excited to be part of this community in this area. So, you know, with a project like this, because it's on National Forest System lands, there is a a process of looking at the potential environmental impacts to a project that has some ground disturbance associated with it. And so, based on the type of project that it is, you look at that, okay, what is the ground disturbance going to be? And for this kind of a project, because it's less than 5 acres, there's really 3 levels of environmental review that's associated with, it's an acronym NEPA. It means National Environmental Protection Act, and that's environmental analysis. And so, depending on the scope and the scale of impacts, you go through environmental analysis. And so there's what's called environmental impact statement. That's the highest level. Those kind of processes for large ground disturbing projects, can take upwards of 1.5, 2 years, sometimes longer, depending on the nature of the project. And then there's another one called environmental assessment, and those are for smaller project areas, still ground disturbing. Certainly some ground disturbing activities that have a certain amount of impact. And then the lowest level of NEPA analysis is called a categorical exclusion. And so in policy, we've got certain rules that we put projects to that say, well, what category does this project fit into? And since this project fit under, was under 5 acres of ground disturbing activity on existing Forest Service property, it fell into that category of a categorical exclusion, or short called a CE or CADX. Sometimes you hear it called a CADX. So with that kind of a process, proposals come in, and we handle them through what are called our small NEPA process. Every 3 or 4 months, we'll gather a number of different projects that have come in. A lot of those are requiring special use permits. So special use permits is, runs a gamut on Forest Service land, from certain road use to towers to doing other types of activities on forest system lands, all the way to sometimes if you have a large wedding, sometimes that requires a special use permit. So lots of considerations for that. So when we get a proposal that comes in, we go through this what's called our small NEPA process. Usually they're CEs, and in some cases those perceived CEs can go to an environmental assessment based on an initial analysis from resource specialists on our east zone of the Superior National Forest. So we've got a team, an interdisciplinary team that's made up of hydrologists, soil scientists, wildlife biologists, silviculturists, foresters, recreation staff, wilderness staff. And so that team comes together and looks at the proposals during those small NEPA gatherings, interdisciplinary team gatherings. And so for this project, the proposal came in. It was vetted initially through that resource team, and initially the only comments at that point is there's going to be some some visualization, knowing that with the values of the visual aspects of the Gunflint Trail and into the boundary waters being of high value. It's in our forest plan, and certainly recognize that. But since the project was at an existing site and an existing tower, those were really the only initial comments from our resource team that came in. And so the next process that we're go through at that point is, okay, based on that, put together a project description with all the supporting documents that we get from a proposer, and then we put those out for usually a 30-day public comment period. And so for this particular project, it's handled a little bit differently just because of the, what we're having here this evening. We wanted to make sure that we had all the supporting information from the state and the county to be able to put forth for that public comment period. And so, as it's already been stated, the public comment period starts tomorrow, and it will run for 30 days, and so that gets us to about May 22nd. And there is a package of information that I've got some handouts. Is the initial letter that kind of describes the project. And from that, you can go to the website and download, or you can call me. I'll have my business cards, and we'll make sure we can send a copy. You can stop by the Gunflint Ranger District and pick up a copy, and then basically provide those comments, in writing. In writing is the best, but certainly I'm available to discuss the project as well. It's best that you call or email me, because I'm not necessarily going to be in the office on any particular day, but can certainly set up a time to meet with each and every one of you if need be. So, it's a project like this, obviously, within our forest plan, within the attributes, the scenic attributes, the wilderness character is placed high value with the public. We all know that, but we also recognize the need for emergency services and the communications. So I'm looking forward to working with folks here over the next few weeks. Time frame post May 22nd, it really comes down to what are the comments that we get from that comment period? Are there things that we still have to investigate? It could mean that I gather together folks in a work group, and we're perhaps going to work through some of the issues. I want it to be something that we can like what's been expressed here, minimal impact, but taking care of the necessary emergency services that we're hoping to provide to the public and all the agencies and organizations that are responsible for public safety. So I think that's it at this point.
Thank you so much, Michael. I want to just thank each of the people who are here tonight, obviously you and our friends who are watching on camera, because we know there's a significant population of this area who couldn't physically be here but wanted to make this meeting accessible. But specifically want to thank all of the partners up here, because this isn't a required process, but we knew that there was a request for a lot of different information and wanted to make that all available and have everybody in the same place to be able to provide those answers. We did cover a lot of ground, but some of the FAQs, that we did cover. What are the other options considered? We looked at those. Why was this location selected? We looked at that. One of the other questions that keeps resurfacing is, when did the county board approve the building of the end of the trail tower? Well, they didn't. There was no decision that was made through the board, because this is a MnDOT tower to be built and funded as part of the state's program. As well, can the current extendable tower be used? No. Well, we looked at that and why. So what happens if we do nothing? Can we change our minds in the future? Yep, we could do nothing, but we're still going to have the same challenges, and it's likely going to come out of our own pockets or on the tax levy or through another program situation in the future. So yeah, we could do nothing, but it would be at a significant cost, and we wouldn't address the safety factors for both our responders and our people. Will the tower also be used for cell service? this tower is intended for ARMER. If there would be a number of permitting processes that would have to be gone through MnDOT and the Gunflint Trail Fire Department, as well as other people involved in that process. The Forest Service, yeah. So that is not what this is intended for. This is not a cell project. This is strictly about ARMER radio communications for public safety. Those are the questions that we've most frequently encountered in this process, but also want to open it up for anything that wasn't covered. You know, this is not a discussion to look at, to review VHF. I mean, that conversation is long gone. It's not an option. It's not an option across the state. Every single county in the state of Minnesota is on the ARMER system. We've reviewed the interoperability. So we're not going to revisit the option of going back to VHF because it's strictly not possible. But if there's any other questions, we'd love to be able to answer those. Over here.
I've noticed on all the existing towers that the antennas extend above the tower structure. Could you tell me how high those are or would be suggested? So instead of an 80-foot tower, are we looking at 90 foot, 95 with the antennas on?
Sure. So I'm going to defer to Shane on this one, but just to give some context to the existing tower sites that you see, the typical installation for ARMER towers includes a 10-foot antenna that is mounted below the tip height of the antenna. So you usually get another 7 feet or so on top of the tower. Shane, is that?
So the towers,
It's on.
maybe shut it off. So the towers that you've noticed, there are antennas that we use that are 12 feet, 12-foot antennas. And so they will protrude the top of the tower another 12 feet. So those towers that you've seen are probably the 180-foot towers that we constructed. So those antennas then are going to 192 feet on top of the tower there. Recently, that manufacturer has stopped manufacturing that antenna. So we are looking at a replacement antenna for that. They may have to be 20 feet, which a 20-foot antenna is common. Our 12-foot antennas were uncommon. That's why they have stopped manufacturing those antennas. But we do still have some of those 12-foot antennas. We plan on using all of those until the time is that we don't have them anymore, we can't get them anymore. But to sit here and say to you that there's going to be 12 feet above the tower, I can't make that determination right now. It could be a 20-foot antenna. We would have to look into that.
How big is the antenna?
Oh, do you know off the top of your the width? I don't even know.
About anywhere between an inch and a half. Anywhere between an inch and a half up to about 3 inches in diameter.
How about noise, wind noise, whistling
Yep.
structure?
Yeah, so typically you see the most noise associated with lattice structures, and what they're proposing here is a monopole. So it should be pretty minimal from a noise standpoint.
Shane, as long as you're there, I had a request from someone. Can the tower be painted where it is not silver and reflective? Is there some sort of coating they can put on the tower so it doesn't reflect sunlight?
It's a good question. Anything that we do to that tower is going to require maintenance. If we paint it, if we add it to turn it into a monopine, anything that we add to that tower is going to require maintenance. Given the climate in this area up here, the maintenance could be significant. There's a reason that the FAA and the FCC are going away from us painting those towers red and white because of that reason. They know it's significant maintenance. They would rather have it lit when you get to a tall enough tower that is lit. But repainting a tower, I'm sure some of you are aware of our Palisade Head Tower that we've got. We've looked at repainting that. It's going to cost us more to repaint that than it would be to replace it. So it's an avenue we don't technically want to go down just because of the maintenance reasons. I hope that helps.
That's an answer.
Let's do this. I'm gonna switch the audience microphone so that we can make sure everybody who's listening on camera can hear, and I'll give these guys the corded microphone.
There isn't enough time tonight for me to go over everything I'd like to go over. But first of all, I didn't know this was going to be a monopole. A monopole is actually going to be, because of the diameter of it, and it's not a lattice where you see through it, is actually going to be much more visible than your crank-up 75-foot tower. Also, you're going to have your dish on it, that's the ARMER apparatus, isn't it?
So
or is that eliminated because you're using the fiber optic?
That's correct. The microwave dish that's typical with the ARMER sites is for the microwave link.
But a monopole is fairly substantial, and that's very visible versus a small lattice structure that currently exists.
So typically a monopole is considered to be less visually intrusive, but it is true that you can see through them. But that's reflected in the viewshed analysis that the state ran. It accounted for the type of tower that they were using, and the language is there on the narrative that gets into the size of a structure that is an arc minute, and then what ultimately an arc mile is, and that's how they derived that formula of 7 miles with 20/20 vision, whether you can see any of it or not.
And why was it decided a monopole versus a lattice structure like currently exists, a narrow lattice structure?
If I could go back one quick second here with that, the monopole, you also have to remember with a lattice tower, as the tower goes up, it does get skinnier. Same with a monopole. So the larger portion of that monopole will be tucked in behind the trees. So as you get to the top, it will get skinnier, just as a lattice tower would. The reason that we chose a monopole over a lattice tower, structural considerations. We feel that with a lattice tower, now you've got the face of that tower in 3 different areas, and it's a larger view shed, we feel, than a monopole with a lattice tower. Because the face, you got 3 faces on that tower. With a monopole, it's just one circle all the way up.
And you have to have your 12 to 20 foot antenna on the top of it?
Well, to provide the adequate coverage, correct?
So you're saying that an 80-foot tower isn't going to give you what you want. You actually have to have it extended above that.
Correct, but that antenna is only 2-3 inches in diameter. So you're not going to pick out the antenna from a distance away. You're going to pick out the tower.
Shane, if you had a 100 or 180-foot tower, would you still have to have 12 to 20 feet on top of that for the antenna, regardless of the tower height?
The 180-foot tower, the reason we needed the height was the microwave connectivity to get over the ridge, or actually get through the ridge where the road comes through. And so the reason for the 180-foot tower was specifically for the microwave connectivity, to get through and over that ridge.
One thing I would add to that question, Valerie, is that if you elect to put omnidirectional antennas lower on a tower, not above the tip of the tower, the result is that you get some shadowing from the tower, the structure itself. So whenever you can, the idea is to build the tower at the minimum height that you need to, and then have your omnidirectional antennas stick up above that to maximize the coverage that the antennas provide.
That's why we brought the technical guy with.
Okay, so I did, even though I'm not going to have time to get into everything and no one will want to, but I would like to just make a couple points. It was just stated that VHF is not anything to talk about. It was also stated that there's been problems on things at Jab Lake, Red Rock Lake, Grandpa Lake. I had a long discussion in the last few days with the head of ARMER's interoperability program, and I can give you his name if you want it, but anyway, what it came down to is I think people are under a misconception that we're going to have 800 megahertz radio coverage through the wilderness. these towers you're proposing still would only extend maybe the one propagation map shows it going down 2/3 of the way down Seagull. And then Alpine and Jap and all those places are still not going to have 800 megahertz. The Forest Service still relies on VHF. And having worked as a wilderness ranger and talking with all the users out there in the last few weeks, the VHF capabilities within the wilderness are extremely good yet. I worked as a wilderness ranger for over 10 years and had to do medical evacs and stuff. So what the head of ARMER interoperability was saying is that you need, and what I had said years ago, is you need to maintain some VHF capability. First, so that you can speak with the Forest Service when you're on incidents, and second, so that you can talk to each other from in the wilderness and out. There is interoperability, ARMER interoperability hardware on at least I think it's 8 of our towers up here. The head of ARMER interoperability says they're already looking at removing some of the stuff in the state where they have VHF interoperability, where they don't need it anymore, and possibly concentrating it along the border, knowing that VHF is going to, no matter what is done with FirstNet or ARMER, you're still going to have to use VHF radios deep in the wilderness. So to give people the impression that 800 megahertz is going to cover everywhere in the wilderness isn't necessarily true. You may get some bleed over, but that bleed over is going to have micro spots where you don't get it, just like everywhere with ARMER. And once you get beyond that range, you don't have anything. So their suggestion was that really, if you really are worried about safety in the wilderness up here, the best thing would be to have dual band radios, an MOA with the Forest Service, so that the fire department, EMS, and everybody can use the Forest Service repeaters. And then with the dual band radio, you send your fire or search and rescue out in the wilderness. You know you're going to lose your ARMER signal. You just switch over to the VHF signal.
I can speak to that. The VHF in the wilderness is not always as good as we'd like it to be. But we do have interoperability in two ways, at least at the Gunflint Trail Fire Department. We essentially carry VHF radios, particularly during the fire season. And we have had plenty of incidents with the Forest Service where we're essentially using their channels and they're using our channels. We had an incident, well, one of these incidents up here where we had one of the fire crews was out, they were on VHF, I had a VHF radio so I could talk to them. They also had an ARMER radio so I could essentially talk to them on both ones. Our crew had only ARMER radios. But the idea is that you're right, is that we need to still have interoperability through VHF with the Forest Service. We have that up here because we have not only all the people who are going to fight fire in the wilderness have VHF radios, but we also have a cache of VHF radios should we need to have more people coming in and we can add them. So at least for us, I think the VHF kind of deal is covered, and our radios are programmed the same as the Forest Service are. So we have access to all their radios. All the fire modules, I don't know about the Wilderness Rangers, what they're carrying, but all the fire modules also have ARMER radios and have all of Cook County's, what they call them talk groups and ARMER, but in them so that we can talk through that. So, and at least so far, since we've been last maybe 5 years or so, we've had really good partnership with the Forest Service utilizing these things. We also have an agreement with the Forest Service to use a particular channel that can be patched into our ARMER system, and so we can all operate together, even if we don't have a VHF and they don't have an ARMER.
I just wanted to make it clear that VHF is still and will continue to be an important aspect of the
in the road.
Yeah, I don't think anyone denies that.
And one of the best ways to make that even better would be to have dual band radios, where then you, if you're going in without a Forest Service person, and you have a dual band radio outside of ARMER coverage, and someone back at Fire Hall has a dual band radio, you guys could talk to each other on VHF if you lose the 800 megahertz thing.
Yeah, that then becomes a money issue.
Expensive issue.
Well, no, it's not really that expensive. We talked about it.
Well, one thing I would say about dual band radios is that they do add a significant amount of expense, and I think that's why the fire department has elected to keep a cache of VHF radios instead of having both. Motorola does this kind of funny thing where they give you the price of the radio in the model number, and so our firefighters carry XTS 1500s or 2500s, and they run about $1,500 or $2,500 for an ARMER radio. Our sheriff's department early on got a grant for dual band radios because they were the first one to go and needed to have interoperability with the fire EMS services that were still using VHF. Those radios are the Apex 7000 models, and they cost roughly $7,000 per radio. So there is a significant difference. You can get used radios and other things to offset that, but there is a significant cost for a dual band radio.
What he had told me was that like a Motorola, you might be looking at around $1,500, but he said that the ARMER program has purchased stuff from radio resellers. They've got them less than $300 that do the same thing.
Jim, that might be all right, but we're really here to talk about an ARMER tower. I mean, the VHF solutions down the line, or working.
Well, I was just making.
I understand that.
VHF will still be needed.
And it is, and we all agree that it will be used.
And the other thing was, I've heard the people say that one of the things that's been said is that certain spots along the trail where there are these weak or dead spots, an example that's used is that I am trying to talk to someone who's 100 to 200 feet away from me, and he can't hear me. And what I'm wondering about is, you do have SOA channels programmed in, right?
We do, but you don't know they can't hear you. Excuse me. I don't know that I need to switch to an SOA channel. I'm on a channel, we're communicating. If all of a sudden somebody is standing over there and can't hear me, we don't know to switch to an SOA channel. That's why we want to have an ARMER channel that covers the areas that we're working from. Yes, we have SOAs, and we use SOAs when we need to communicate amongst ourselves in specific areas. But we're not switching back and forth just because somebody's standing in a dead spot.
Well, if these dead spots are in the ARMER manual where it tells you how to use it, it says that if one is expecting to work in an area where there are multiple or extended dead spots, that the group should switch over to an SOA. And what he told me is that, like on fires in the Twin Cities, when they go to a fire, everybody will switch to an SOA and work off of that, with one person dealing with relaying things that would have to go back to dispatch. Because SOA, just so people understand, the ARMER radio turns into basically a two-way radio, which has really good distance. In their documentation for ARMER as of a few months ago, they still say it's up to 3 miles and has better penetration of buildings than the ARMER system. So basically you're talking radio to radio, and you don't need the tower. So he was just explaining to me how they're trying to teach people for workarounds, because no matter how many towers you have, there's always going to be microspots that are dead spots. No different than when we used to just use VHF and you just had to move to another spot. So I just wanted to mention those two technicalities.
As a department, we're very aware of how the SOAs work, and we do use them when necessary. But the fact is, what we're looking for is a system up here where we don't have to be switching back and forth to SOAs. If we hit an area where it's necessary, we'll do that.
Thanks. We've got a couple of questions over here. We'll share the love a little bit.
Hi there, I'm Tanya Kittleson. I work with Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness, so I might be bringing a different perspective for folks tonight. first want to say thank you for being here. I know folks have traveled a long way, come down the road, this is your backyard. So there's a lot of different voices and faces in the room, so thanks for showing up. And our mission, just so you know, is to protect, preserve, and restore the wilderness character of the Boundary Waters. That's our name, right? Friends of the Boundary Waters. But it's also including the Quetico ecosystem and the Superior ecosystem. So tonight, that is the perspective that I'm bringing to the table, is the Boundary Waters. And having had multiple conversations with many of the folks in this room, thank you for your time, I have learned a lot, and tonight's presentation was really great. You gave a lot of information, and I think probably the first time a lot of folks in this room or on video have heard. So thank you for sharing it, and it does help understand kind of the process you've gone through. It would have been great if it was a little bit more transparent, to have people involved in that conversation along the way, or at least be informed about it along the way. But a couple of questions that I'm kind of left with come from what you shared tonight. But before I get to those two questions, I have a couple of points to make. I brought a visibility analysis that we had contracted with the GIS company to look at some of the visibility impacts from certain locations within the Boundary Waters. So back in 2015, when we were having conversations, we did a study similar to this, but Maureen Hayes retired, so we found another person to help us out. I hope she's having fun. So I want to share some of that information with you, and I'm also reminded that I know this is really important for the local public safety entities, and I completely respect that desire. And we support, and did back in 2015, trying to find a compromise that was, just like you're saying tonight, least visually impairing and most supportive of public safety. And so we continue with that thought. And we're thinking about, you know, the ARMER tower mandate from the state is 95%. Back in 2015, it was over 98% met in Cook County. And so this tower is a special request for the end of the trail. People live down here, there's businesses down here, understand that. So I also recognize that in one of the images, and I'll show the one I'm talking about, but one of the images shows that a lot of the coverage from the tower that's being talked about tonight extends a long way out into the Boundary Waters. And there is no mandate by state or federal government that any coverage needs to be provided by ARMER in the Boundary Waters. And so I just want to make that really clear, that we don't need to do that, and it's not required. So thinking about how do we turn our attention to the places where people live and reside and have businesses and roads are being traveled. I think that's really important in this conversation. And the map that I was just referring to is the one that you showed up there, Ron, the visibility, or the coverage map. A lot of that is really a lot of significant coverage in the B-dub, and that's not required by any regulations anywhere. So, so the report that we did, and I have a few copies to share with folks. It shows from 9 different spots in the Boundary Waters, 2 different entry points, a couple of different businesses, and then not in the Boundary Waters, and then 7 different campsites. And so this feels a little awkward doing this with one hand, but yeah, that'd be great. If you could start with folks at the table, that'd be awesome. The methodology that was used to do this report is similar to what the state has been using. It's using LAS data sets to support the LiDAR images created in 2011. And so that's post all of the fires that Valerie mentioned. So it's after the cavity and the Ham Lake and all the other fires up here. So the analysis shows 2 different elevations. One is the ground, and the other is the vegetation analysis. And so I will turn people's attention to a couple of images in particular. if you go to page 6, that shows the lines from the campsites or the entry points or the wilderness canoe base. And the two that we broke down specifically were campsite 477, it's kind of right in the center of that map on page 6, and then also the wilderness canoe base just up and to the right of there. And those profiles are given on the next page, on page 7. So the red line on page 7 on those two, when you see it on the XY axis, show, you know, a 6-foot tall person standing at the specific GPS locations looking back to the 80-foot tower. We didn't do any antennas on top. So it's an 80-foot tower. And obviously on the lower one, that's the wilderness canoe base. And you'll see in the next 3D image that there's a hill there. So you cannot see through the earth hill, and that makes a lot of sense. But on the one above it, the campsite 477, the skinny little points that the red line goes through at 4,000 from point 0, this is a 1 meter by 1 meter analysis. And so those, you know, 3 foot by 3 foot is likely a tree or 2 or 3 trees, probably at the height of their forest maturity, right? Not sure they'll withstand the next windstorm whenever that comes. So if you knock down a tree or two in natural forest progression, you're going to have a clear line of sight from even campsite 477. So that's over a mile out, mile and a third or so. And then if you continue on to the next page, I think that has the 3D images. So 477, it's hard to see. It shows up better on a computer screen. Sorry about the printout. But the red line is the elevation of the trees that you see, and the yellow or green line of sight just touches the one red on the 477. So it's an obstructed view right now due to a tree or two, but in time it will be clearly visible from that 477 campsite. And then to look at a similar diagram that MnDOT provided, we looked at the visibility from the tower looking out, and essentially it's looking out back at the tower. And I know, Rowan, you did a nice job. It's not really that big of a deal when you think about it like that, but I'd like to put it out there in a different perspective, from a boundary water user perspective. So it's about a mile from the tower proposal site to the next shore, right, over in this area. Okay, it's 0.92 miles actually. So within a mile, anyone along that shoreline, anywhere in that lake, will see that tower pretty strong. And when you think about, and Valerie, you came up with some great numbers. I had some very similar ones that I had calculated from the Forest Service, but boundary water entry permits shows you have 16,600 visitors per summer season, really. That doesn't even really include winter users. So if you have, that's one time, so that's their welcome. Here's your welcome, here's a tower, now go have fun in the boundary waters wilderness. And then here is your farewell. This is the ending of your trip, and you come back, another 16,600 views on this tower. So that's over 32 or 33,000 visual impacts on people. So if my logic is making sense, you've got 16,600 times 2. Each person is seeing it twice. So it's a pretty significant impact when you look at it from a wilderness character perspective. And I know that's not the primary thing for MnDOT or for every stakeholder here, but it is a concern for us. And we honestly wanted to provide information for you to consider. So thinking about it in a way that completely exhausts every other alternative. Here I heard you tonight explain a lot of the different possibilities. But I still am left with the question, this is one of my questions at the end, is why can't we have a shorter tower than 80? Because if the coverage goes towards land, the coverage might be sufficient at 50 or some other number. So because you don't need 80 feet to go out into the boundary waters. Is there any reason other than like this is really pushing MnDOT and you know, folks to think about it differently, but why not shorter? Could we do a coverage analysis at 50 feet?
So I'll let Shane talk to this a little bit too, but I would just say a couple things right off the bat. Getting the antennas above the tree line is extremely important, because if you're below the tree line, you're going to really quickly see a pretty serious diminishing return for your coverage. So when we looked at the topography and the existing trees, that seems an appropriate number to accomplish that aspect. Beyond that, I think if you're trying to provide coverage in a specific area without pushing coverage into somewhere else, in an ideal world, what you need to have is a perfectly flat landscape, and then the area that you're trying to provide coverage needs to be a perfect circle. And so when you have a long, narrow area, like the end of the trail that we're trying to cover is, as well as topography that stops the signal in certain areas, if you're going to provide adequate coverage for all the areas that you need to cover, you're just by the nature of the design of the tip of the trail and the topography, you're going to have some amount of bleed over. So if you could look at it two different ways. If you were going to stop coverage so that absolutely none of it went into the boundary waters, you wouldn't be providing coverage to all the areas that you need to. And we looked at it conversely, what is the optimal height where we do cover all the areas that we need to, that we want to, but then again, because of the reasons that I mentioned, the shape of the property and the topography up there, there is a fair amount of bleed over of coverage into the boundary waters. And Shane, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think Rowan hit it perfectly. Is we need to get over that treetop or we lose the coverage to where the areas that we're looking at. So we chose 80 feet as that's kind of our standard for the treetops to get up and over that, and that's just what we went with was the 80 feet. Sure.
Is there any way to get a coverage analysis for a shorter tower, even 60 feet, just to compare the two?
I guess that would have to be something that the Forest Service would like us to look into for the analysis. Yep.
One thing I'd like to add too is I understand your concern from the boundary waters perspective. However, if you're coming to that shore from the boundary waters, there's at least 5 or 6 cabins that are so much taller than this 80-foot tower is, that are lit on top of the hill. So these people who really want that wilderness experience when they're coming in aren't going to get it. I would feel your concern is more important in an area without cabins, without resorts, without lit shorelines and that sort of thing, and that certainly makes sense. But in this case, it almost seems reasonable that this little tower here and 4 cabins up here lit on top of the hill, the visual is going to be seeing the lit cabins on the hill, and the tower will be very insignificant from my perspective.
I hear that. I think that's a slippery slope for us, because once development starts, it tends to continue and
Development's
continue.
there.
Right. But if there's ways to minimize the impact, why not consider the options of minimizing it even more?
I'm assuming that you're going to submit all of the comments through the public comment period. Okay. Did you have any more questions related to what we talked about? No? I think we're good. Thanks. Anyone else who hasn't had a chance to speak yet? Sir?
Somebody mentioned that ARMER was going to be doing it anyways. So would there be no ARMER tower being put up on the end of the trail if we weren't trying to get it for the? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. Yep, correct. You are correct in your statement there. The legislative mandate for ARMER is 95% mobile level coverage, county by county basis wide. And we've got counties in southern Minnesota that are flat that we've got 1 tower and then 1 on the border that we've built in that county to suffice that mandate. Cook County, given its elevation changes, its geological nature up here, and the fact that we listen to the county's desires to build smaller towers, so that we have had to build additional, or we need now additional towers And so your statement is correct. We are beyond that 95% mobile level coverage for the county currently. If this is not approved, MnDOT will not be coming in to try to build to cover this area.
Can you explain mobile
Sure.
versus?
Go ahead.
Technical. You give a good answer.
So a mobile radio that Shane referred to is the radio that you see in a vehicle, a squad car, an ambulance, and really the basic technical differences are twofold. One, they have a larger and higher gain antenna typically, so you get more bang for your buck in terms of power and signal strength received. And then the other big difference is that your portable radio that these guys are carrying on their hips run at about 3 to 7 watts, and a mobile radio transmits at about 25 to 50 watts. So it's a significant difference in capability. So when Shane says, you know, the mandate is 95% mobile coverage county by county, you're not getting 95% coverage from a portable level. You're getting significantly less. And the other exception is also A, the boundary waters, and B, in-building coverage. So those are some important exceptions.
Road access, right?
One other thing, the mobile radios that we have in the fire trucks and the ambulance don't work either. I mean, that just because they have more power in the SAG in that area, you're still not able to talk to anybody. So that extra thing from a mobile coverage is no real significance to us, you know, going out to get somebody.
The incidents that were listed under the poll of the deputies' coverage was mobile coverage, still having challenges with it. That's from use with squad cars and responding to scenes. So likely portable for the fire department and search and rescue, but from sheriff's office coverage, that would be mobile. And still listing those challenges.
Just to clarify,
I don't know. Talk loud. Jim, you broke it.
We've got to back up.
just to clarify back on that one is,
Some of you may have seen we do have a proposal in for a permit for the Lima Mountain Tower site with the Forest Service right now as well. That is a tower site that would fulfill that mandate that we do need on a county by county level basis. So just wanted to clarify that there is a proposal right now for the Lima Mountain Tower site, that we do need that tower site to fulfill our mandate in Cook County here. So.
One other thing I'd like to share about the percentage of coverage and why, in relation to why we're here. It's a key area. If you look at other counties, and if you were to say you're going to have 95% coverage in the metro area, but you were going to leave out, say, U.S. Bank Stadium, that wouldn't be acceptable. And talking to our public safety people and some of the demonstrations that you saw tonight, sort of get after why this area is so important for our public safety personnel. And it's more about the specific area of concern and the implications for the tourism, the visitors and the residents and the public safety personnel that we have, as opposed to just a blanket number in terms of percentage and coverage.
Thanks. I was wondering if there's any way that we can have another informational session, because there's several people who aren't here tonight. I know that the live stream is a great way to connect with people, but it doesn't allow people to actually engage in the conversation. So if they have a question, they can't ask it right now. But is there a way to maybe hold something in the beginning of June when more residents, more business owners are around and able to engage in this conversation?
All of this footage is going to be available on the county's YouTube channel throughout the duration of the next month-long comment period. So there is that opportunity to review it, everything that's been said, and submit the questions through the Forest Service in the process, and submit comments along with that too. So essentially, they can watch it at their convenience and submit those comments. So it is equally accessible. There would be no additional. I mean, you can certainly contact the county or any of the authorities, especially the Forest Service, during their permitting process to do that.
Will you make the PowerPoint available as well? something that
Yep,
can be
it
shared?
can be linked with the footage or available, yeah.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yep, and that's all through the county's website. You can get to the YouTube channel. Jim's got another question?
Sorry to bother you, but as one of the extremely few year-round residents that live on Seagull Lake, that live there year-round, I see one other one. I would hope that you just let me say a few more things, because most of the people here don't live there. First of all, two important things. One, I still feel that there needs to be a better analysis of possibly using the Seagull Guard Station versus the public beach and recreation area. We call it the fire hall, but before the fire hall was there, it is a highly used, the only good sand beach people can drive to on the Gunflint Trail. And this is a heavily used recreation area. It's a picnic area, it's the beach, it's the public landing. The land was acquired from the Blankenbergs for that purpose, for recreational purposes by the Forest Service. So we haven't talked about the effects on that recreational area. This tower would be right on the recreational area, right there. It's visible. It's and a monopole will be much more visible.
Sorry, I just want to clarify. Are we talking about where the fire station is now with the tower that's there?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's some talk that it hides it a little bit because there's trees. Well, the trees you're talking about are all dead, burned jack pines that are falling down at a higher and higher rate every year. Once those trees fall down, there is nothing between the tower and the recreation area is right there. That's what it is. So nobody's talking about the effects on that. And I'm sorry if some people don't want to hear this, but I live on the lake year-round, and I have for over 20 years. And I'm not against trying to enhance and figure out solutions to make better communications for the EMS people. We never were, even 3 years ago when we spoke out against the 180-foot tower. We just feel that there could be some better analysis on things, and it looks as if replace the current 100-foot tower at Seagull Guard Station, that's 2.2 miles from where you want to put a tower right now. If you look on the coverage map, it's hard to tell on there, but it seems to me that for the most part, it hits the developed areas with that. So what would it take to get, because the goal should be to hit all the developed areas, because as you know, if you head out into the wilderness, you're still going to have to use VHF, despite if you don't want to admit it or not. So it'd be nice to see better analysis of that option. The other option we brought up, I'm glad you used the option that I brought up 3 years ago to wait for the fiber optic to come up. I brought that up 3 years ago, that it was coming, let's use it. But we also thought that a tower at the guard station, at the Forest Service guard station, combined with a bidirectional antenna for dealing with that, the worst problem area is between the Seagull River and the Seagull Narrows, where up at the end right there. That seems to be where you have the most dead spots. And we never got to see an analysis. What would it take for a tower at the guard station and a bidirectional amplifier at the end? You find a spot up there where you have really good coverage and you put a bidirectional amplifier there, maybe on a very short pole that could maybe amplify it in that area. And some of us still feel that that's an option that hasn't been analyzed enough. The other thing I'm concerned about is we're putting this tower, it seems like this is being done because there's a build date been set already. You know, that's how it kind of feels. And once we made it evident that we knew that this was all of a sudden coming, just by happenstance seeing it in a Forest Service SOP, that now we're having this going on just to make sure that you've done your public thing and can still meet your construction date this summer. And it seems to us that some of this should be slowed down, because the other thing that hasn't really been looked at is FirstNet, the whole new generation of safety that Minnesota just adopted on October 3rd. So if we go and build a tower now for ARMER, and the tower and its building aren't capable of providing FirstNet, should FirstNet want coverage up here, then we're looking at having another tower and another building. And none of that has been addressed. And it seems to me that these are all things that need to be addressed before you make this final decision, which seems to have been made already. And I'm not saying you shouldn't get better coverage. I'm just saying, let's really analyze how bad it is. Are these, and I'm starting to believe, and before I wasn't so sure, but I'm sure maybe there are some areas up here, up there that the coverage is more than just microsites. It covers areas, but we don't even know how extensive those areas are. We see some dots, but we don't know. I mean, we never saw a coverage map of what Gunflint Tower is actually providing up there, because I do know that the ARMER radios do work to the end of the trail, but there are dead spots and weak spots. If they're that bad that they are that big of a safety hazard, yes, we need to find a solution. But I just think you need to slow down a little bit here and look at stuff. And I would ask, have you figured out what happens if first AT&T and FirstNet decide they want to build up there? And I do have another follow-up.
Let's address that first.
For the fire department, FirstNet is not really a good option as we understand it at this point. It's a cell phone service. It's just a dedicated cell phone service is what it amounts to. And so, yeah, but you can only talk to one person. And so for us, that's not really too useful.
My point though is if AT&T and FirstNet want to build up there, and what you build isn't going to be capable of housing their equipment in the building or on the tower, then all of a sudden we're going to have they're going to want to build another tower in another spot at the end of the trail. And I would like Infosys to and the state to address that, because it seems to me you should be looking at this holistically and thinking about the future as well, so that we don't all of a sudden say, oh, now we need to build a tower over here, we have to build another building. Because people also forget, at this site, it's not just a tower, it's a building with a chain link fence and razor wire across the top. And then all of a sudden you'd have to do another building like that and another tower. So could you address if that's been if you guys are planning for that?
I can address this. So maybe to clarify first what FirstNet is. FirstNet, I know you know, Jim. FirstNet is a commercial-based data service that they are offering to emergency responders. The folks that choose to use it will get charged to use it. With ARMER being a two-way radio system, there's no user fee to use it. And essentially FirstNet is AT&T. They have won the bid to build out FirstNet. They plan to utilize their existing tower sites, their existing networks, and they need to fill in their gaps in their network to provide a service that even Cook County, if they were to choose to use it, they would have to pay for it. And they know if they don't fill in the whole county, why would the county want to use this service? And that's every county that they're dealing with right now. So FirstNet is in the early stages. They're looking at build out right now. They have not sold it to every county. The state had to either opt in or they had to come up with a plan of how they were going to build out the network and the funding to build out that network. So opting in doesn't necessarily state that MnDOT is going to be a user of the system or State Patrol. It's just stating that we are opting in to allow AT&T to build out their network instead of us building out a network like we did ARMER. It's strictly data usage. And it's a commercial cellular network is what it is. So for me to use state tax dollars to subsidize a tower that will allow AT&T on there for FirstNet is not legislatively mandated. I cannot do that. I cannot use state tax dollars to allow, to build this tower strong enough to make sure that AT&T wants to go on there, unless I've heard from AT&T that they desire to do so, and they will be paying a lease fee to MnDOT, to the Forest Service, and whatever other parties are involved in this tower. So until we get word from AT&T FirstNet that they want to go on this tower, I can't construct a tower that is strong enough to make certain that AT&T can get on this tower.
So in other words, you say this tower that you're going to build up there has no ability for co-location.
That is not correct.
Well, that's what I'm asking.
It has the ability for co-location, but I can't take into consideration the AT&T FirstNet approach to it, as in they're going to be coming on this tower. Until I know that they're going to be on this tower, then because when you build a tower that is structurally sufficient to hold cellular antennas, you've got a much larger foundation, you've got a much stronger tower that you have to build, and when you get a larger foundation, you've got a bigger hole you have to build, you've got more concrete, you've got more rebar, and in this area up here, that could include dynamite as well that we have to introduce to this project to build that larger foundation, which would increase costs significantly.
So we can expect probably a much more significant second tower at the end of the trail for FirstNet and Cell.
I wouldn't say that's correct, but go ahead if you want.
I just want to add one thing, and I think it helps speak to that. The big difference between FirstNet and the ARMER system is there is no coverage mandate for FirstNet. There are subscriber-based penalties and incentives. And what that means is that if AT&T provides a better service than Verizon or T-Mobile up here, and the Sheriff's Department or any users in the county opt in to use it because it's the best option for the needs that they have, they're going to meet their quota. They don't have a state or federal mandated build out for a certain percentage of coverage. So theirs is strictly a subscriber based, and the idea that if they co-locate on some of the other existing towers in the area that are already capable and significantly taller than this tower, Gunflint, Mid-Trail, and others, I think their desire and the return on their dollar to look at spending the money to either try to co-locate on an existing MnDOT tower that's 80 feet tall or potentially build their own tower at the end of the trail, I think is in my personal opinion, pretty unlikely.
You're saying that there will not be another big tower at the end of the trail. This would be the last tower?
I didn't say that. Again, I said in my personal opinion that based on the different factors that I just said, I think it would be extremely likely, especially if they were to choose to co-locate on the existing county-owned towers up the trail.
But that wouldn't reach to the end of the trail anyway. That's the same problem with ARMER and Gunflint Tower, right?
What I can add, Jim, is that when these cellular providers co-locate on towers, if the tower is not structurally sufficient to hold their equipment, they will, if they want to locate on that tower, they will enhance that tower.
But will this monopole, so it's decided you won't look at anything further like the Gunflint guard, the Seagull guard station or BDA or any other options, or a tower at Chickwalk. I don't think people would really like that. I see eyes go up immediately. Well, we're talking.
What's being discussed, though. So
my point. It was just a point I'm making. But if so, you go ahead and do this 80-foot monopole at the public beach and recreation area, right on the shore of Seagull. Is it going to be is it going to handle co-location of? Would the building have enough room to put AT&T equipment in, and would the tower be able to support another carrier? And I feel if you're going to do this, it has to have that option. I mean,
the tower will support public safety equipment. FirstNet FirstNet is not considered public safety under the ARMER dedication.
But the state considers it public safety. If you read the governor's message when he adopted it on October 3rd, the governor said he wants cell phone coverage through the whole wilderness, specifically.
I guess I have not read that, but you may be correct. I don't know on that one. But any commercial cellular provider is not allowed to locate inside of our shelters that has public safety equipment inside of it. So any tower that they go on, a MnDOT tower, an ARMER tower, I believe Cook County Tower as well, they cannot place their equipment inside of our shelter. They have to put their own shelter at the site.
So there is a real chance that we could see a second building with chain link fence and razor wire at the recreation site and another tower right there.
The majority of these cellular providers are going away from shelters as well. They're going to these open air platforms, which houses their, it would still be inside of our tower site, correct. Again, this would all have to go through the public scoping process of the Forest Service, and everybody would have their opportunity to make their comments on it.
I guess I just wish we could plan for the future and not just run into something because you have a build date. The second thing I'd like to ask Rena is, have you been in contact with cell phone companies that want to provide service on the upper Gunflint Trail? And have you been discussing that with them or have come to any contracts?
We have, over the last 5 or 6 years, been contacted repeatedly by AT&T to be on the Gunflint Tower. We have not been able to move forward with that in any way, shape, or form because of land exchange, which is still underway. And we just can't do that. We would have to start at which one?
What about beyond Gunflint?
No.
You haven't been in any discussions with
Nope.
anybody over
And we haven't even actually had a formal request where we've done other studies. So.
But if you do put it on Gunflint, you already have stated that you're going to build a second tower at Gunflint?
No, I said that tower is very full, and we will have to do some work, maybe move things around, and hopefully be able to get cell service on that tower. But at this point, that's really premature. We look at it and try to think, well, what will happen, but we haven't really had a formal request on that yet.
I guess just some of us that live up there, we don't view any of it as premature because we'd like to have all this stuff really well thought out and discussed and all options looked at before something is actually done.
I agree with you on that, Jim, actually.
Thank you. We've got another question back here.
I just have a few corrections to Jim's comments. Number one, I've been on Seagull Lake for twice as long as Jim has, over 45 years. He's wrong in that the public, what he calls the recreation area, was given to the Forest Service from the county. It was not. They did give a portion where the old public landing was as a parking lot. It was about 150 feet wide at most. The Forest Service bought Seagull Resort, and it was converted to the public landing and where the fire hall is now. It does have a nice beach. I also support the tower at the fire hall location.
I guess I just wish if you're going to put it there that we would look at that it could handle anything else that's coming.
Those are all great comments. Thank you very much. And I'm hoping that they will be submitted through the public comment process. But if there are other questions that we need to address, we want to get those answers. So if there's any questions about the information that was presented, happy to address those. Okay. Got one up here.
You did a great job presenting all this information tonight. And I thank you very much for what you've done. It was very clear and good job. Thank you.
Over here again.
This is, having said having said that it's about, you know, the armor, this is just a good opportunity to clear up or make more lucid, because there's a rumor going around that, like, okay, we're getting cell phone service on the trail, and I don't know if it's because of this FirstNet stuff or anything that. So since it's kind of a public forum, maybe somebody could say something real quick about dispelling that rumor, or if there's something else going on that I don't know about.
I think we've talked about this in a few different formats. We've been on the radio talking about this. In 2012, there was a change that was made in the Middle Class Relief Act, and what that change was for what's called the eligible facilities request. And what an eligible facilities request is a form that cell service providers can use to preempt local ordinance processes when it comes to communication facilities, cell phone sites. And it also states that you can't prevent them if there's structural integrity from preventing them from co-locating on an existing tower with some other things, you know, reasonable market rate and some other things like that. What we have done at the county to try to operate in anticipation of that change, and then also FirstNet, which is driving some of this build out of these cell phone networks, is to adjust our tower ordinance and try to incentivize co-location on existing towers, so that the cell providers, when they show up and they have this exemption and the ability to circumvent our local ordinances through co-location, we can entice them to co-locate on existing towers, so that, you know, therefore we're negating or minimizing the additional impact that they would have. We have been we have been contacted by AT&T on several sites throughout the county, and the Gunflint Lake site has been asked about by AT&T in terms of FirstNet. Currently, what we're doing is going back and forth between them and explaining to them that it's in the land exchange process. We've met with Michael and talked about some other options that are there, the potential of them proposing to use a special use permit to run simultaneously in case you know, land exchange is delayed longer than we anticipate. But right now, the approach that the site acquisition companies who represent the cell phone companies are taking is that we're just going to sit back and not do anything until land exchange is completed. So we know that they're interested in co-locating, which we think is a good option as opposed to building a new tower site, obviously. But we are, but at this point, we're just waiting to hear more from them.
Thank you.
Can you as a county either say yes or no to FirstNet? Can you just say flat out yes or flat out?
As a county, you can say no to not using the service, but the state has opted in, so now they have essentially allowed FirstNet to build out their network in the state.
They can pretty much go where they want to go.
Wherever they don't have coverage now is essentially where they're going. Yep. So, and for everyone out there, FirstNet has contacted me to co-locate on MnDOT ARMER tower sites statewide. They are actively looking. I think there's only one in Cook County that they've contacted us on. Is that in Lake County? It's Lake County, I think, actually, but go ahead.
Well, one tower that you guys own.
And then you guys.
And then they've contacted us on several county-owned towers. And again, because of what Shane said about their ability to build out this infrastructure regardless of what we want, we really think our best option and our best avenue is to entice them to co-locate on existing towers and therefore minimize the impact of a build-out of this type of service.
But it sounds like from your description before, Shane, that it could be a pretty extensive tower that they need to support the FirstNet. So how can they co-locate on an existing tower that might not be structurally stable or designed for them?
So that would be specific to this end of the trail tower that's being built, which again is being built as a very minimal solution. The county owns 11 towers throughout the county and then controls the property under several others. And the majority of those towers are built with the structural capability already in place to accommodate co-location.
Any additional questions on the proposal for the proposed Seagull solution? It's hard to speculate about things that are not on the table yet, but if there's information we need to clear up about what's being proposed for this site, we can address those.
This one is specifically for this site. I don't believe you've shared any details about your exploration around bidirectional antennas and that possibility at this location for Seagull Lake. It seems like a viable alternative. It's been done in another place in Minnesota. I'm guessing you've done some research. Could you maybe share some of that? Good question.
Yeah, definitely. So BDAs or bidirectional amplifiers have been talked about and kind of a lot here. And so to talk about why the county has elected this proposal in favor of a BDA solution. The big one has to do with just expense, upfront cost, and then also the ongoing replacement and maintenance. So as we talked about before, if MnDOT is willing to build out a full-blown ARMER site that has better implications not only for our end users but from the initial cost and then also maintenance and improvement standpoint. We've been looking at BDAs in other areas of the county, and just for the BDA equipment alone, we've been quoted around $90,000 per BDA, and that's before the support structure. So you still need to build some sort of support structure to hold and house that equipment on. The other thing that we've taken into consideration is that when you use an outdoor BDA, you have to achieve a certain amount of vertical separation between the antenna that receives the signal and the antenna that broadcasts the signal. And why that's important is because you need the broadcast signal to still be high enough to provide the coverage that you need, but then you need the receive antenna to be enough above that, taller, to not cause interference. So again, it's a support structure issue, cost issue, but just sort of at the face of it, looking at it, we don't really anticipate that it would be much of a reduction in visual impact by comparison to what's being proposed now. And then Shane, I don't know if you want to talk about that from a MnDOT standpoint.
Sure. And I think Rowan touched on it, but maintenance as well is a big concern. Sending a technician from Duluth out here to work on that, or even sending Rowan's time out there. We've seen other counties that have installed these, more specifically on top of water towers, to get better in-building coverage in their county seats. We've had issues with interference on the ARMER system with these, so they've continually shown that they're not a good option for us to go these route of BDAs because of the continued maintenance and the continued concerns that we have with them.
But weren't you planning on 3 BDAs on towers now right on the shore on Highway 61? Because you're now saying there's dead spots at Colville, Coldland, and Tofty Schroeder, and you're talking about building 3 more towers right on Highway 61 on the shore to fill those spots now, and it was stated that you were going to use BDAs, I thought.
Now that was from a MnDOT standpoint is what I spoke of, but if the county's interested in doing that and they've got Rowan, a technician that's near those, then it's not so bad to install those or use those. But it's something that we have to look at. It's something that if the county decides to go forward with those, they would be working closely with MnDOT to make sure that there's no interference issues and those kind of issues. But
yep. Originally was thinking is if you had a 100 to 120 foot tower at Seagull Guard Station would provide pretty much what the 80 at Seagull Guard Station is, and you had a few micro dead spots up at the end of the trail, that you could possibly put a BDA there just to amplify that signal in that trouble area, and therefore you could get away with having a tower where there's already an existing 100-foot tower on Forest Service land, and then a small BDA on a small structure in that difficult terrain at the end of the trail.
So I guess a couple things on that. It would still be the added cost. We still would need to lease the dark fiber. We would still then need to build a BDA, and we would still then need to build a support structure. So, I mean, really from both from a cost and an impact standpoint, specifically for the end of the trail, we don't think that's the best solution. We think the proposal that we're proposing tonight is a better solution than that. In reference to the statement or the question that you had about down on the shore, we're in really early stages. That's where we got the quote from, just to try to understand what type of price we would be looking at for a BDA. But you know, we know that MnDOT is not going to be building any more tower sites that are going to improve coverage in those areas. So, you know, based on the concerns that we have from the public safety community, we are exploring other options, and BDAs are one of those options that we're exploring. And again, just to answer your question, and that's where we got the quote from.
Okay. Well, thanks for.
Just like to add one more thing before everyone leaves. I know I didn't speak during the whole presentation, but I thought it was absolutely wonderful. And I would just like to point out that the relationship and the partnership that MnDOT and Cook County has created, there's no other in the state that we've got with another county like this. The amount of tax dollars that we've saved for the ARMER system by utilizing resources that the county has and sharing resources is absolutely phenomenal. Hundreds of thousands of dollars we've saved by using the county resources, the towers, that we didn't have to construct by being such a strong partnership with the county. So I just want to make sure I pointed that out, that there's no other relationship that we've got like this throughout the state. So, and it's unique up here. We all know that. And so we're trying to do our best.
Thanks, Shane.
Yep.
Thank you, everybody, for coming and for your input, for your questions. Do participate in the comment period, and we'll make the footage and the presentation available. So thank you for your time.